In addition, there was a short-term pause or funding freeze on certain discretionary spending payments, such as government grants, only for us to quickly look at the scams, dishonesty, waste, and abuse that's taken place in our government for too long.
The Trump administration's sudden 90-day freeze on foreign aid has sent shockwaves across the Caribbean, threatening to unravel decades of progress in disaster preparedness, public health, security, and economic stability. From Jamaica's violence prevention programs to Haiti's fight against gang violence and the Bahamas' climate resilience efforts, U.S. funding has been a lifeline for the region. But with billions in aid now on hold, Caribbean nations face a looming crisis that could destabilize entire communities, embolden criminal networks, and open the door for geopolitical rivals like China to expand their influence. In this video, let's break down the far-reaching impacts of this funding freeze, explore the political and legal battles it has sparked, and reveal why this decision could have dire consequences for the Caribbean and U.S. interests in the region. Starting with divergent needs and shared vulnerabilities. According to statistics from the Congressional Research Service, U.S. assistance to Latin America and the Caribbean during fiscal year 2023 channeled about $663.7 million through development assistance, $523.5 million through economic support funds, and $584.9 million through international narcotics control and law enforcement. In addition, global and regional funds such as $52 million from the Inter-American Foundation and programs of the State Department's Population, Refugees and Migration Bureau, PRM, also provided funding. Much of that money has been used to address the root causes of instability, such as boosting public safety, fighting drug cartels, strengthening more muscular justice systems, or improving infrastructure resilience in hurricane-prone islands. All of that has been called into question by the new stop work order that U.S. legislators note was issued without much consultation or publicly released criteria. Moving on, let's have a look at the impact of the freeze on key nations. At number 1, we have Jamaica. Impacts vary across different parts of the Caribbean, but far-reaching consequences already hang over it. In Jamaica, government officials worry that programs to avert violence in volatile cities, financed in large part by the U.S. Agency for International Development (USAID), will be denied funds to continue to train at-risk youth and develop community policing programs. With an estimated $54 million a year in U.S. support, Jamaica also relies on U.S. assistance to support sustainable agriculture and small businesses in rural areas. Similarly, Trinidad and Tobago, strategically located near key transshipment routes, receive funding to assist in combating trafficking in drugs and human smuggling. A sudden funding cut in these two nations alone would reduce specialist forces and lay off local staff responsible for everything from gang intervention programs to maritime surveillance systems. Then there's the Bahamas. Equally at risk is the Bahamas, a nation frequently battered by hurricanes whose increasing ferocity has been linked to climate change. In 2023, the Bahamas received $6 million from the USA to support its fight against climate change. If the freeze continues, pre-positioning emergency relief funds, getting first responders ready, and fortifying disaster coordinating efforts can be put on hold. And now let's talk about Eastern Caribbean. Meanwhile, smaller island nations in the Eastern Caribbean, St. Lucia, Grenada, Dominica, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, face postponements in funding programs to preserve their ocean resources, rebuild coral reefs, and install renewable energy pillars to protect their tourism economies against ecological decline. For instance, the U.S. Department of the Interior's Office of Insular Affairs allocated $1.43 million in fiscal year 2023 to protect coral reefs and natural resources across U.S. territories and freely associated states. Additionally, NOAA's Coral Reef Conservation Program awarded nearly $21.4 million in grants and cooperative agreements to support coral reef conservation projects and scientific studies in 7 U.S. states and territories and internationally in Caribbean regions. Next up, there are Guyana and Suriname. Guyana and Suriname are new participants in the offshore oil game, and they have welcomed U.S. support to shore up their governance systems and environmental protections. The U.S. has actively supported these nations in enhancing their governance and environmental oversight. For instance, the U.S. Export-Import Bank approved a $526 million loan to Guyana for an energy project aimed at doubling the country's electric capacity and reducing oil imports. The freeze on such cooperation would jeopardize local oversight capabilities just when the region is experiencing a resource bonanza of extractive activities and associated social challenges. By the way, if you're finding this video informative and valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us. Thank you. And then let's discuss Haiti's dire situation. While these nations are transitioning, Haiti is one of the most heavily impacted. Geographically part of the Greater Antilles, Haiti is likely to receive a disproportionate percentage of U.S. and foreign aid due to chronic political instability, chronic underdevelopment, and recurring natural catastrophes. Under earlier agreements, the United States was to contribute approximately $15 million to the United Nations Multinational Security Support (MSS) force in Haiti. However, only $1.7 million was released before the freeze took effect, leaving over $13 million in limbo. The MSS, a force of troops from Kenya, Jamaica, Belize, Guatemala, and El Salvador, is responsible for quelling gang violence and supplementing local policing efforts. Reporting from the UN Integrated Office in Haiti, BINUH, indicates that more than 5,600 people were killed and more than 2,200 injured in 2024 alone, a shocking increase over the previous year. With funds frozen, Haitian security forces and their regional partners may not be able to confront entrenched armed groups. Many policymakers in the Caribbean note that although Haiti's crisis garners most of the publicity, the freeze's impact reaches every corner of the region, touching groups that never receive publicity. U.S. assistance supports thousands of local programs, from disease surveillance in the Dominican Republic to job training programs for youth in Barbados. The Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, CBSI, one of the key vehicles for U.S. engagement, promotes police reform, maritime security, and community development in several countries. Through CBSI and related programs, the U.S. is helping Caribbean governments interdict drug shipments, trace illicit financial flows, and strengthen judicial processes. An uninterrupted funding block would impede these efforts, threatening the advances in citizen security over the last decade. The political response of U.S. legislators has been swift to materialize. The House Haiti caucus publicly objected to the freeze, stating that it places the most vulnerable in the region in peril. Co-chairs Representatives Yvette D. Clarke of New York, Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts, and Sheila Cherfilus McCormick of Florida warned that Haitian nationals in temporary protected status (TPS) would be sent to a United Nations-defined devastating crisis area if the freeze spurs more destabilization. But concern is not limited to Haitian issues. Members of the Congressional Black Caucus and House Foreign Affairs Committee also warn of a more sweeping Caribbean concern, referencing threatened funds to combat drugs and prepare for climate change as a primary threat to regional security. But then there is the legal and political pushback. Legal analysts argue that Trump's action raises questions about the separation of powers. The U.S. Constitution keeps control over federal spending in Congress's hands, and laws such as the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 have previously prevented presidents from unilaterally impounding funds already approved by Congress. Former Assistant Attorney General William Rehnquist reaffirmed the rule in 1969, deeming sweeping presidential impoundment power unsupported by reason or precedent. Critics argue that the open-ended freeze disrespects Congress's intent and recipients' urgent needs, even if it is just a review of spending to ensure it aligns with U.S. interests. The Government Accountability Office, GAO, and other overseers have indicated that continued impounding would lead to constitutional commitment battles in courts. Now let's have a look at the short-term and long-term fallout. In practical terms, Even a 90-day cutoff period can sabotage vulnerable programs. Organizations such as the Washington Office on Latin America, WOLA, note that many nonprofits rely on regular funding to maintain staff and programs. In Jamaica, for instance, youth empowerment program managers need to budget ahead of time for staff training. At the same time, conservation groups in the Eastern Caribbean oftentimes work when US-financed grants become available, and long-term uncertainty forces them to lay off staff or cut new programs. Such precipitous closures shortchange years of effort, destroying local capacity that is hard to rebuild, mainly if skilled staff depart or trust in US reliability is breached. In addition, economies in the region are still recovering from pandemic losses. Delaying or eliminating investments in job creation and social services halts that recovery, possibly inducing migration to the United States, ironically, the opposite of what US policies aim to deter. In the broader geopolitical realm, the freeze also can harm American influence. China, for instance, is heavily investing in infrastructure in Caribbean nations, funding roads, ports, and relief programs in response to crises, often with fewer strings attached than US aid. If the United States freezes or delays its aid, local elites would be willing to deepen their bonds with Beijing or other willing partners. Experts argue that a US pullback would open the door to geopolitical competitors to gain goodwill and strategic traction in a place a short flight from US shores. The freeze would also threaten security cooperation, including counter-narcotics efforts. The Dominican Republic, for instance, collaborates closely with US agencies to detect and block drug shipments to North American markets. Less cooperation would embolden crime networks, which can outwit local forces without continued outside help. Caribbean policymakers and many US voices, including Republican and Democratic legislators, have appealed to the administration to provide at least partial waivers to life-saving programs or expedite the review to get key programs up and running again. Historically, unplanned US foreign aid reductions have sent government agencies and NGOs scrambling to find emergency workarounds. In 2019, a scaled-down version occurred when the Trump administration cut funding to a group of Central American countries, only to replenish a portion of it a few months later. In that gap period, many violence prevention and anti-poverty programs fell apart. Pundits fear that a repeat in the Caribbean would be a debacle, given the region's vulnerabilities, high natural disaster risk, tourism dependence, and exposure to extraneous shocks such as global market volatility and narco-trafficking corridors. Although Haiti's unstable status garners a large percentage of media attention, rightly so, given the extent of its humanitarian and security crises, each corner of the Caribbean is likely to suffer harm from the Trump administration's 90-day freeze of Congress-approved funds. Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, the Bahamas, the Dominican Republic, and the small Eastern Caribbean island states heavily rely on US support to sustain their law enforcement, healthcare provision, environmental protection, and educational advancement. The cutoff of Congress-approved funds not only increases these communities' exposure to violence, instability, and ecological damage, but also undermines key bilateral relationships that maintain control of migration streams and narcotics trafficking. American legislators and oversight institutions view this move as a dimension of a more fundamental struggle over the separation of powers, a trial case for determining whether any president can override legislative appropriations decisions. Meanwhile, Caribbean leadership and civil society actors can only hope that the United States reaffirms its interest in long-term regional security when the review period is completed. Otherwise, the legacy of this freeze is likely to be a more dangerous, less prosperous Caribbean in the coming years. The Trump administration's 90-day freeze on foreign aid has put the Caribbean at a crossroads, threatening hard-won progress in security, climate resilience, and economic stability. But amidst the uncertainty, there is hope. By reaffirming its commitment to the region, the US can help build a safer, more prosperous Caribbean that benefits its people and global stability. The choices made today will shape the future of millions. What are your thoughts on the US foreign aid freeze and its impact on the Caribbean? Would this move weaken regional stability, or could it positively affect aid distribution? Share your perspective in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Check out this video on Trump's Panama Canal threat that could be a risk for the Caribbean's economic future. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analyses like this. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support helps us keep the conversation going and reach more people. This is Caribbean Focus Lifestyle. See you in the next video.